The crowd laughed louder with every step the drunk man took, dragging the girl like a broken suitcase through the gravel path. Her wrist was tied with a frayed rope, the knot cutting red into her pale skin. Dust kicked up around her bare feet, but she didn't lift her eyes, not even when the man shoved her forward, stumbling. She caught herself on her knees. $20, the man shouted, waving a crumpled beer can in the air like it was a flag. Come on, y'all. Mute girl. She don't talk, don't scream, don't argue. He hiccuped, wiping sweat from his forehead with the same hand that held the rope. The beer can slipped and rolled into the dirt, but no one offered to pick it up. She can clean, cook, haul. Hell, I'll even throw in the dress she's wearing. The county fair had long ended, but the crowd hadn't. Men stood around bored, half drunk, some chewing on peanuts, some just watching like it was entertainment. The girl's face was smeared with dirt and dried blood near her lip. Her hair hung in greasy strands across her cheek, hiding the bruise under her eye. Someone tossed a bottle cap at her feet. She didn't flinch. She even pretty under all that filth, one of the teens muttered, nudging his buddy. You sure she's mute? A man with a straw hat asked. She ain't said a damn word in 2 years, the drunk replied. Just stands there and works. Ain't got no soul left to rebel. From a distance, a tall black man leaned against a rusted truck. He wore a wide hat that shadowed most of his face. One boot crossed over the other. His hands were still, but his eyes were locked. Not on the drunk, on the girl. No one noticed him. They never did. Not when they wanted fun. Not when a black man stood silent. And not when that silence had weight. The girl's shoulders rose, barely. It was like a shiver that wasn't cold. A child behind her had screamed a moment ago, playing tag. The crowd had laughed, but only the man at the truck saw her react. A flinch, a pause, a twitch in her neck. She could hear. The men started betting like it was a dogfight. $10, 12, 15 if she scrubs floors, too. A group of white boys stepped forward, half smirking. We'll take her. Ain't like she gonna say no, right? The drunk man looked satisfied. Done, he slurred, already untying the rope. She didn't resist. That was the worst part. Her hands dropped to her side. No struggle. Just surrender. The boys reached for her arm. That's when he moved. The black man stepped forward, slow and heavy. His boots scraped against gravel. Silence fell like a slap. He wasn't supposed to speak here. Not him. Not in this part of town. But he did. I'll give you 40. The words cut clean. The man with the rope froze. The teens looked confused. The black man kept walking, stopping only a few feet away. $40, in coin, now. The drunk scratched his beard. You serious? Count it, he said, pulling a leather pouch from his coat. The coins clinked like thunder. The crowd muttered. A few stepped back. One of the boys scoffed. She ain't worth that much. Didn't ask your opinion, the man said, never taking his eyes off the girl. She looked up for the first time. Their eyes met. Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came. Her face didn't cry. It didn't beg. But something flickered there. Sharp. Like a warning. Or maybe a plea. The drunk blinked, sobering just enough to feel the weight of the moment. Deal, he said. She's yours. The rope fell. The girl didn't move. The man didn't ask her to. He stepped closer and extended his hand, not to drag her, not to claim her, but to offer. She took it. The crowd watched them walk away, one limping, one silent. No one spoke. Not even the ones who had laughed. Because deep down, they knew something strange had just walked past them. A black man who shouldn't have interfered. A mute girl who maybe wasn't. And something about the way they walked off, side by side, no words needed, made even the loudest drunks forget to finish their drinks. The wind moved slow over the Alabama fields. Long blades of grass bent and whispered against the fading fences, and the only sound was the quiet creak of a screen door closing behind them. She hadn't said a word since they left the fairground. He hadn't expected her to. The wagon rattled over broken dirt roads as the sky turned soft behind them. He held the reins with one hand and glanced back only once, to see if she was still there. She was, sitting upright, bare feet tucked beneath her dress, her eyes fixed on the horizon like she knew something he didn't. By the time they reached the farm, the sun had disappeared behind the hills. Chickens clucked quietly in their coop, and a tired old hound lifted its head and gave a half-hearted bark before laying it back down. He parked the wagon and waited. She stepped down without help, carrying nothing but the memory of that rope still burned into her wrist. The door to the small farmhouse creaked open, and the warm scent of old wood welcomed them both inside. "I'll show you the spare room," he said softly. She didn't nod, didn't look confused, just followed. The room was bare, just a bed, a window, and an old dresser. She sat on the edge of the mattress and looked around with eyes that had seen worse. He stood at the doorway for a second too long before saying, "You'll be safe here. Ain't nobody come out this far without a reason." She turned her face toward the window, but her eyes weren't watching the trees. They were listening. The next morning came slow. He was already outside feeding the goats when he saw her walk across the yard. No shoes, no fear, just quiet steps like she'd always belonged there. She didn't ask what to do. She didn't wait for orders. She picked up a feed bucket and went to work. He watched from the field, hammer paused in his hand. The way she moved, measured, precise. The way she noticed the sagging gate before he mentioned it. How she avoided the hole near the well without ever being warned. He thought about the fairground again. The way she had flinched. The way she had looked at him. Not like a lost girl, but like a survivor hiding in plain sight. At breakfast, she placed a cup of coffee in front of him. She hadn't seen him make it. He hadn't told her how he liked it. But it was just right. "Thank you," he said. She didn't answer, but something softened in her shoulders, like she'd heard it anyway. That afternoon, while repairing a fence post, he tested something. He dropped a nail from waist height. She was 20 feet away, facing the other direction. She turned her head, just slightly, but enough. Later, when the storm rolled in and thunder growled low across the fields, she stepped onto the porch before the rain even touched the roof. She stood beside him as lightning cracked far in the distance. Still mute, still listening. She never looked scared. He didn't say it out loud, but something deep in him shifted. He had taken her in thinking he was saving a mute girl from a monster. But what if she wasn't mute? What if she wasn't helpless? What if she was just waiting for the right place, the right moment, and the right man not to question her silence? That night, he locked the doors out of habit, but not out of fear. She was already watching the windows. It started with a knock. Not loud, not fast. Just 3 slow taps on the farmhouse door like the sound already carried judgment. He wiped the dust from his hands and opened it without surprise. Sheriff Talbot stood on the porch. Behind him was Reverend Harlan from the local Baptist church, and Roy Tanner, the white rancher who once offered to buy out his land for pennies. All three men wore tight smiles, not friendly, not warm, just stretched across their faces like masks they didn't care to wear right. "Morning, Washington," the sheriff said, adjusting the brim of his hat. "Mind if we come in?" "I do," Silas replied, leaning one shoulder against the doorframe. "Say what you came to say." Reverend Harlan cleared his throat like he was getting ready to deliver a sermon. "Word around town is you took in a girl." Roy Tanner stepped forward, boots scraping over wood. "A white girl." Silas didn't move. "She works here, lives in the spare room. That a problem?" "Depends," the sheriff answered. "On what kind of arrangement you got with her." Silas let that hang in the air for a beat. "Room and board. She cooks, cleans, nothing more." The silence turned heavy. "You know how this might look," said the Reverend, clasping his hands in front of him like he was about to pray. "A single black man, alone with a young white woman. People talk." "They always do," Silas muttered. The sheriff shifted his weight. "You think we enjoy coming out here? We're just doing our duty, making sure everything's appropriate." "She don't even speak," Roy added. "Heard she's deaf too. Who knows what she understands?" Behind them, the screen door creaked. She had stepped out onto the porch, apron on, tray in hand, 3 glasses of water, a plate of biscuits. She moved without fear, without hesitation. Eyes lowered, chin still. She offered the tray with both hands, perfectly still, like someone raised to serve. The men stared. The Reverend took a glass. Roy grabbed a biscuit like it proved his point. The sheriff said nothing. Silas watched her closely. Her eyes didn't meet theirs. Her face was unreadable. But the moment Roy let the biscuit drop on purpose, just to see if she'd react, her foot shifted slightly, then froze. The sheriff clapped his hands behind her head. Loud, sharp. She didn't move. Perfect. They nodded among themselves, almost disappointed. "She seems well cared for," Reverend Harlan said slowly. "She's quiet," the sheriff added. "She's obedient," Roy said. Silas said nothing, but as the tray was taken and the men turned to leave, he saw it. The smile, tiny, flickering in the corner of her mouth, gone in a blink, but real, and not for them, for him. As they stepped off the porch, the Reverend gave a final warning wrapped in pleasantry. "We'll be back. Just routine. You understand." Silas closed the door behind them and turned to her. She was collecting the empty glasses in silence. But there was something else in the room now. A weight. A presence. Like the air knew something had shifted. "They'll be back," Silas said under his breath. She looked up, straight into his eyes. No more lowered gaze. No more empty quiet. In that second, the mask she wore slipped, and what stared back at him wasn't a scared girl. It was a mind, sharp, aware, and watching everything. He had been right from the start. She wasn't mute. She wasn't deaf. She wasn't scared. She was hiding. And now, for the first time, he realized he wasn't protecting her. She was playing a game they hadn't even begun to understand. The night was silent, but not peaceful. He sat on the porch, boots planted firm on the old wood, a half-drunk cup of coffee in his hand. Crickets filled the background, but his mind was loud. Something didn't add up. That girl hadn't flinched when a grown man clapped behind her head, but she reacted to a horse neighing 50 feet away. She moved too carefully, too purposefully. She didn't need instructions. She anticipated them. And that smile, the one she gave when those men turned their backs, wasn't the smile of someone thankful. It was the smile of someone watching everything fall into place. He didn't trust easily. Years of surviving Alabama soil as a black man had taught him that trust could get you killed. But curiosity? Curiosity made you survive longer. The door creaked open behind him. She stepped out barefoot, arms folded across her chest, her long dress catching the moonlight like a shadow. He didn't turn. "You're not deaf." The words hung there, bold and unshaken. Still, she didn't respond. "You heard the rooster before it crowed." Silence. "You dodged a nail I dropped when your back was turned." Still nothing. "And you smiled," he added, finally turning to face her. "When they left." A beat passed, then another. And then she spoke. "You already knew, didn't you?" Her voice was calm. Not soft, not timid. Calm, like someone who had been waiting years to use it again. He didn't answer, just watched her. She sat across from him, tucking her legs under her, eyes steady. "My name's not Clara," she said. He raised an eyebrow. "It's Rose. Rose Elizabeth Thornton." He blinked. That name didn't mean anything yet, but the way she said it, it was supposed to. "Your father?" he asked. "Dead." "Your mother?" "She died when I was 10. My stepfather came after." "The man at the fair?" She nodded. "Jack Morrison. He married my mother for money, then drank it all. When it ran out, he sold what was left of the house. And me." Silas didn't blink. "And the mute act?" She looked at him now, straight through him. "In this town, being educated means nothing if you're a girl. Being smarter than the men makes you dangerous. Being white didn't save me. But playing dumb? That kept me alive long enough to watch them all." "You planned this?" he asked, jaw tight. "I didn't plan you." That answer landed heavier than expected. She stood up, slowly, and walked toward the edge of the porch. The sky had begun to cloud, dark gray ripples forming above the horizon. "I was top of my class," she said. "Boston University. Psychology and medicine. I was going to be someone, until my stepfather dragged me back and told everyone I went crazy. Easier to say I was broken than admit I was more educated than half the town." She turned her head just slightly. "He told everyone I couldn't speak. And then he made sure I had no reason to." Silas swallowed hard. "I was going to run," she continued. "But then I saw you." "At the fair?" "Yes. You didn't look at me like I was trash. You looked at me like you saw something deeper, like you'd seen it before." "I have," he said quietly. She looked away. "And now?" he asked. She pulled something from her apron. A folded piece of paper, a list of names. He took it. Tom Riley, hardware store owner. Sheriff Talbot, corruption, labor bribes. Pastor Harlan, embezzlement, witness threats. Roy Tanner, illegal labor contracts, forged deeds. "What is this?" he asked. "Targets," she said. "They speak freely around me. They think I'm deaf, dumb, and harmless." She reached into her apron again. This time, a recorder. A tiny one. Worn, but functional. I've been recording them for weeks. He looked at her differently now. Not as a victim, not even as an equal, but as someone who had walked into a town that hated both of them and decided to dismantle it from the inside. "You're dangerous," he muttered. She smiled again, but it wasn't cruel. "Only to men who think I'm not." He looked back at the list. "You want my help?" "I want your protection. I want your land to store this evidence. I want your silence until it's time to speak." He folded the paper. "What do you want in the end?" "To burn the lies down," she said, "and plant something honest in the ashes." He stood up slowly, looking out over the farm. "If we do this," he said, "there's no turning back." She didn't hesitate. There never was. It started quietly. No bold moves, no raised voices, just whispered glances and silent routines. Silas didn't ask many questions. He just started noticing the changes. Rose began rising earlier than him, sometimes already out in the barn by the time the rooster crowed. He'd find tools missing from their usual spot. Not stolen, just temporarily used. A hammer, a coil of wire, a screwdriver tucked neatly back before breakfast. And paper. Sheets of it, folded into her apron, scribbled on the backs of old feed bags. Notes he caught glimpses of, but never read without her offering. The girl who once didn't speak now moved like a woman with a purpose. But outside their farm, things remained the same. Or so it seemed. On Wednesday afternoon, Silas returned from town to find a metal biscuit tin tucked beneath the porch floorboard. Inside, photographs. Grainy, but clear. One showed Sheriff Talbot shaking hands with a man Silas knew had beaten 2 migrant workers half to death last year. Charges dropped. Another showed Reverend Harlan slipping a wad of bills into a brown envelope behind the church. Rose stood behind him as he flipped through them. "They trust what they see," she said softly. "And no one looks twice at a mute girl. They will when this gets out." She didn't smile this time. "That's the point." She began visiting town more. Said she needed sugar, thread, sometimes nothing at all. She'd walk into stores, churches, even the sheriff's office, and nobody paid her any mind. They spoke freely, comfortably, like she was invisible. She told Silas about the things she overheard. Names, schedules, codes on storage sheds. But more than that, she noticed what no one else did. Tom Riley sold tools at double price to black farmers, while offering white customers discounts. Pastor Harlan used church funds to pay gambling debts, covering it with forged donation slips. Sheriff Talbot kept a second set of books, one for real crimes, the other for the ones he ignored. One evening, she returned with bruises on her wrist. Silas looked up from the stove. "Who?" She didn't answer. Just placed the recorder on the table and pressed play. "Keep looking at me like that, girl, and I'll teach you manners you won't forget," a voice snarled. Roy Tanner's. Rose's voice was quiet on the tape. "I can't hear you, sir." Roy laughed. "Good. Let's keep it that way." Silas clenched his jaw. "You need me to handle it?" he asked. Rose shook her head. "I need you to be patient." That night, she showed him the full plan. In the kitchen, she laid out maps, notes, audio cassettes, copies of forged papers, names of migrant workers, dead land deeds, and payment records written in the sheriff's own handwriting. "You did all this in 2 weeks?" Silas asked, stunned. "Silence gives you more time than people think." He looked at the spread. 2 weeks of quiet power building laid out like a war table. This enough to get them arrested? It's enough to destroy their masks, she said. And once those fall, everything else follows. She'd also met someone in town, a man named Dr. Matthews, one of the only black doctors in the county. Quiet, sharp, educated. He treated both black and white patients, and he'd already been suspicious of the town's moral elite. He agreed to help. Discreetly, Rose had handed over copies of every document. The originals stayed with her. "If anything happens to me," she told Silas, "he knows what to do." Silas didn't like the sound of that. "Ain't nothing gonna happen to you." She looked at him then, not with fear, but with something stronger. "I'm not scared," she said, "just ready." The next Sunday, the church would be full. A special sermon. Reverend Harlan had announced it himself. A message on morality, order, and the sins of pride. They planned to bring every mask down in front of the whole town. Silas looked at her across the table. She wasn't that girl from the fair anymore. She never had been. She was a woman building justice out of ashes. And in that moment, he knew. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were about to set fire to everything that had kept them small. Sunday arrived with a bright, cloudless sky, as if nothing was wrong. Church bells rang across the valley, echoing through the still morning air. In Millersville, everyone who wore power like a uniform made sure they showed up early. The pews filled with white families in polished shoes and ironed shirts. Bibles clutched under arms, secrets buried under smiles. Reverend Harlan stood at the pulpit like a man chosen by God himself. Robes crisp, voice smooth. "Today," he began, "we reflect on morality, order, and the importance of knowing your place in the world." The crowd nodded. Some whispered praise. Others shot quiet glances toward the back pew, where a black man sat beside a pale girl in a soft blue dress. Silas stared straight ahead. Rose kept her head low, eyes hidden, but only just. Whispers rippled through the room. "That's the girl, ain't it?" "Thought she was mute." "Can't believe they let them in." Reverend Harlan cleared his throat. "And let us pray." Just then, the side door creaked open. Dr. Matthews walked in. Black suit. Briefcase in hand. He didn't sit. He walked directly to the pulpit. Harlan's voice faltered. Brother Matthews, what's—" "I believe the congregation will want to hear what I've brought," Matthews said, setting the briefcase on the pulpit with a heavy click. Gasps spread across the room. Rose stood. She stepped down the aisle. Each footstep echoed louder than the bells had. Then she spoke. "My name," she said clearly, "is Dr. Rose Elizabeth Thornton. And for the past 3 weeks, while many of you treated me as deaf, dumb, and disposable, I've been watching." Every eye turned toward her. Every mouth froze mid-word. Tom Riley shifted in his seat. Sheriff Talbot sat stone still. Roy Tanner's smirk vanished. "You mocked me," Rose continued. "You talked over me. You threatened me. But what you didn't do was check if I was listening." She nodded to Dr. Matthews. He opened the briefcase. Stacks of paper, photos, audio tapes, names. "Tom Riley," she said, locking eyes with the hardware store owner. "We have receipts showing you charged black farmers triple the price for the same tools you sold to white customers." "That's a lie!" he shouted. We have your own handwriting, Matthews said calmly, lifting a sheet. Sheriff Talbot stood up. This ain't the place for— Sit down, Rose said, her voice louder now. Or should we talk about the $12,000 in bribes you took to ignore illegal labor practices at Tanner Ranch? Gasps, murmurs, silence. You have no proof, Talbot barked. Rose pulled a recorder from her bag. Did you think a mute girl couldn't use a mic? Matthews pressed play. Talbot's voice crackled out loud. Just keep the papers off my desk, Roy. I don't care what they do out there as long as I don't see it. Reverend Harlan stepped forward. This is slander. This is the Lord's house. No, Silas finally spoke. This is where truth comes to be seen. Rose walked to the front, standing directly under the stained glass window. Reverend, she said, how much of the orphan fund paid for your mission trips to the Houston casino? You can't prove. Bank statements say otherwise, so do hotel receipts, and so does your secretary, who you haven't paid in 4 months. Harlan backed away. The crowd stared. Some stood up. Others covered their mouths. And Roy Tanner, Rose continued, turning slowly. Your ranch holds 5 undocumented workers with no contracts, no pay, and threats of deportation if they speak. Roy lunged forward. But Silas was already there. He didn't hit him. He didn't have to. He simply stepped in front and stared him down. Roy froze. Matthews lifted one final envelope. Copies of all evidence have been sent to the State Attorney General's office, the Montgomery newspaper, and the Federal Labor Board. The weight hit all at once. Some people tried to leave. Others just sat in stunned silence. Rose scanned the room one last time. For weeks, you saw me as broken. Today, you see the truth. She looked directly at Sheriff Talbot. You thought you had power because people feared you. Then at Harlan. You thought holiness would protect your corruption. Then, finally, at the entire congregation. But the truth doesn't need to shout. It just waits until the lies collapse on their own. She stepped back. Silas took her hand, and together, without needing permission, they walked out. Behind them, the church that preached obedience sat in stunned, absolute silence. No one rang the bells that day. They weren't needed anymore. 6 months later, the town looked the same, but nothing was the same. The roads were still dusty. The church still stood tall. The hardware store still had the same broken neon sign flickering out front. But the names on the buildings? Different. Tom Riley's shop had closed after the lawsuits hit. His name was scraped off the window. Now it read Fair Tools Company, owned by a Latino veteran and his daughter, both of whom had been overcharged for years before Rose exposed the price manipulation. Sheriff Talbot? Serving a 3-year sentence in state prison. The irony was cruel. His cellmate was a black farmhand he once arrested for resisting. Last anyone heard, he'd requested solitary. Said he couldn't sleep with the lights off. Reverend Harlan disappeared. The denomination stripped him of his title, and every town he tried to relocate to already knew his face. Rose made sure the files went national. He ended up 2 towns over, selling funeral insurance door to door. Knocked on Silas's property once by accident. Didn't take long for him to turn around. Roy Tanner lost his ranch. Federal charges, labor violations. No one would buy his land after what came out. So it sat empty, grass swallowing the barns, silence growing where cruelty used to shout. But the Washington farm? It thrived. Rose turned the guest room into a free clinic for farm workers. Open twice a week. No forms, no judgment. She treated sunburns, infections, pregnancies, and wounds that came from more than just work. They came from the system, and she knew how to heal both. Dr. Matthews joined her. Together, they created an education program for rural teens, Black, Latino, even poor white students who had never imagined stepping into medical school. The first class had 12 students. The youngest was 12. The oldest, 43. And Silas? He expanded. 3 new barns, 2 new fields, 12 employees, men and women who used to be invisible, now paid fair wages and treated like family. At town meetings, folks now asked for his opinion, not because they suddenly respected him, but because they knew the town ran better when he spoke. And when Rose stood beside him, they listened. Not because of her skin, or her voice, or her past, but because she had burned down their lies without ever raising hers. One summer evening, under the wide Alabama sky, they sat on the porch as the sun dipped low behind the hills. Silas sipped sweet tea. Rose was reading. The children, their 2 adopted daughters, chased each other through the fields, laughter echoing through rows of corn. He watched them for a while, then turned to her. "Never thought I'd be someone people listen to." She closed the book softly. "That's 'cause they spent years convincing you that you weren't worth hearing." He looked out at the farm, at the distant hills where trouble used to come from. "Now they listen," he said. "No," she corrected gently. "Now they can't ignore you." He smiled, then asked, "Why didn't you tell me back then, when I first brought you home?" She thought for a long second, then said, "Because I needed you to protect me for the right reason. Not because I was broken, but because you believed someone was worth protecting, without knowing what they could offer you in return." He nodded slowly, taking it in. And then she added, looking out at the land they now shared, "And I needed to know if you were the kind of man who would stand beside me when I finally stood up." The wind carried no reply. It didn't need one. Because beside her, he stayed.